Welcome to Becoming the GC, the podcast that dives deep into the journeys of general counsels and chief legal officers, uncovering the insights and strategies that help define their success. Hosted by Joe Schul, founder of Inside Counsel Academy. We share real-life stories and practical advice from successful GCs, guiding you on your journey to the top. Tune in and discover what it takes to become the exceptional legal leader your organization needs.
Hi, I'm Joe. Today's guest is Jean Liu. Jean is a brilliant lawyer with a science background who has transitioned from the GC chair to the boardroom. This was a fascinating conversation full of wisdom for people wanting to do either or both roles. Stay with me to the end where I'll share my key takeaways from the episode. The show is sponsored by Inside Counsel Academy, where in-house counsel go to elevate their careers while enhancing their lives, and also by General Counsel West, a law firm that supports GCs of healthcare companies and their teams with an inside counsel mindset. I'm here today with Jean Liu. Jean is a biotech executive and board member with scientific training and 20 plus years in the biotechnology industry as a chief legal officer and other business roles. Currently, she's serving on 2 public company boards and a private company board. Before that, she was the GC of Halozyme Therapeutics, and then more recently, the chief legal officer of CJ Inc. And before that, long before that, we were law students together at Columbia in the same graduating class. We actually studied for the California bar exam at the same time on the campus of her alma mater, Stanford. Jean, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Joe. So great to be here.
Great. Okay. I want to spend some time talking about how the GC role led you to board service.
Okay.
Having been a GC informs how you approach things as a board member. But first, I want to go back in time and have you tell us about what you think got you to the GC role in the first place.
Well, I'll have to rewind all the way back to law school. So as you previewed in my bio, I started off actually doing science. And that was what I originally thought that I was going to do. And then I switched to the law. And so when I was in law school, and then when I started my first sort of years in the summer in law firms, I quickly realized that it was actually really fun to use my scientific training in addition to my law training. And I loved actually combining the two. And so I thought, well, one of the things that is most thrilling about basically science is that you actually get to you can dig into the business of it as well as and the science of it in addition to the law aspect of it, right? And I thought, wouldn't it be great if I could actually do that, but all the time? And so if you're in a law firm, you obviously just get cases, whatever they, comes your way. And sometimes they're like in the electronic arts, which I did. And that was pretty interesting too. But I really loved the biological sciences. And I thought, if I could get a business role doing this, that was also that could leverage my law, then that would be it. And of course, I've just described what a general counsel is, right? A general counsel is largely a lawyer who specializes in the business that the client does.
Right. And so what kind of scientific training did you have?
When I started undergrad, I did molecular biology, which is basically the study of how molecules, that's the molecular part, like basically we're talking genes and proteins are expressed and are in the body. And we're typically talking about a human body, obviously, when we're talking about therapeutics, but it can theoretically be in any sort of living being. So it could be like a tree, or it could be bacteria. It could be a virus. I mean, the molecular biology is basically understanding how those molecules are made and expressed in a living being. And of course, how they're regulated. And it's a very complex science, which is, why many people study it and it takes forever.
Right, right. So unlike for the rest of us, by the time you got to law school must have seemed pretty easy.
Actually, it really wasn't. Because that was one of the things I kind of discovered. And I will tell in a story about when I went to law school. I did actually pretty well in science, but my first year in law school, I would say I was a mediocre student. And it took me a while to get used to it because writing blue books, or in our case, I don't know what law students do now, but in the case of where you answer questions where there's no real right answer, and it's more looking at your analysis and understanding sort of the reasons behind, why things are decided the way they are, and then all the points and counterpoints is actually, I think science is pretty good at that, but the expression of it and the what I would consider the writing down of it. I mean, people make jokes about like scientists not being terrific in that aspect, and I think lawyers. I mean, our training is to basically be able to be advocates, which is to express whatever our positions are in hopefully the best and the most eloquent way and the most understandable and most persuasive way. And I think that, that was something I actually had to learn a lot. I had to start from the beginning and really learn well, like in law school.
That makes sense. I hadn't thought about it in that way, but we present things as if they're fact.
Right.
When in fact they're our advocacy.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is different.
So back to your original question, which is what brought me to being a GC. I just recently had a discussion with one of my good friends from law school, and I had no memory that I really wanted to do that in law school. And I didn't think about doing that until I was in a law firm. But she reminds me actually that I said something to that effect when I was in law school, but I have no memory of it. So it could have been that was like deep seated and that's what I wanted to do. But I think that I very quickly in law school, after I got into law firms, I started off and actually first doing intellectual property litigation. And then I had a couple clients that were in the biotech area. And then I liked it so much that I decided, well, it would be great to be a specialist in that area. And then so I turned my career when I was like a fourth year associate from doing patent litigation to doing basically deal work, transactional work. One of the things I really wanted to do is with a business lens, I wanted to really think about moving business forward. And a lot of litigation, as we all know, you're fighting about events that happened in the past. And, particularly in intellectual properties, did you or did you not use somebody else's technology? But you're talking typically about technology because lawsuits typically commence, obviously, when the technology is being used and potentially, and mostly when it's very profitable and lucrative, right? And so it's backwards looking. And I had a couple of clients where, we did a great job for them on the litigation front, but then, the client actually went away because they were outcompeted or technology kind of absorbed whatever their, function is. And so I think the lesson I kind of learned about it was like, you got to keep your eyes forward and keep looking forward. And so to me, again, it seemed obvious to me that I needed to learn much more about the business and keep looking forward. And so that's when I started doing deal work. And then once I started deal work, it was also a very natural transition. I mean, I probably did it intentionally because I wanted to eventually be a general counsel. And so I sort of intentionally probably adapted my career to help for that cause, right?
But Jean, that's unusual for people who are in big law firms now or who have been in the past.
Yeah.
Must be thinking that's difficult to do as a fourth year associate to totally pivot to a new practice group, was it?
It was. It was because I think that, and again, like a little bit, I'm dating myself because it's been a very long time since I was in a law firm. And I think that a lot of times, back in the day, when I think back upon it, it only feels difficult because you probably have to take steps back, right? Because they're not going to treat you with the same experience as like a third or fourth year associate. Because I remember when I started drafting agreements de novo, it was like you had to go all the way back to probably what first, second year associates did. And I had a little bit of an advantage because of my scientific training. I think people wanted me to work on the cases because a lot of times people they had a hard time recruiting lawyers who could understand the technology. And so I think that they were probably predisposed to want me on their matters because of the scientific training. But honestly, God, Joe, I don't even know because I feel like there's so many people who come from scientific arts now. It may be that it's a lot easier to recruit people. So maybe I'll come back and say, maybe it is not so easy now. I don't have a really good sense of how easy it is right now in a law firm. But for me back then, I think it was still a little rare for people with technical degrees to be in law firms. So I think that because of that, I had probably a lot of accommodations and help from people around me who wanted to see me on their matters, probably because of my science, which was really helpful.
Yeah. So you made that transition successfully. And then
Right.
how many years were you at the law firm before you took your first in-house job?
I was probably, I think I remember taking my first in-house job when maybe it was 1998. So maybe five years. So I graduated in 93. So 98 was my first year in-house. So that's like 5 years later, I guess, something like that.
Okay. And what kind of role was it that you took?
So my first title was VP of Legal. And as you can imagine, it was a very carefully negotiated title because really what I wanted was to be the first lawyer and the head lawyer in a small startup. And it was really small. Like when I was probably the third senior person hired at vice president level. There were three founders and there were three vice presidents. And so like make it up like maybe employee number five or number six. And it was important to me to because I mean maybe this is the intention. I really wanted to be a general counsel. And so I basically asked for a title that wasn't quite GC, but it effectively kind of was GC. So that's what I did.
Did you earn the GC title then in that same role?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
I got the GC title probably a year or a year and a half later, and it was like a formal ask of my boss, and he said yes. So
Okay.
yeah.
Great. So biotech is,
Yeah.
I work in healthcare, but biotech is its own thing. What's it like being a GC of a biotech company? What are the types of issues that you're dealing with that maybe are unique to that space?
Biotech is a really unique space. I mean, I think that for one, you have to realize that most biotechs are not profitable. Like they're not formally profitable in the sense that even they can be very, very large, but not formally have earnings like the way we think about it. And it's because typically drugs are very prone to failure. Like most drugs fail. I mean, I know you've always heard that. And so getting a drug approved is a really big deal and it's very rare. But it's everyone tries and everyone spends a tremendous amount of money trying to do it. And so and there's a lot of, even though biotech, even though it's hard, I think a lot of people are motivated because one, it could be lucrative if you get like a really good therapeutic. A lot of people are really motivated. That's on the investor side, but a lot of people are also motivated by just the fact that there's always the holy grail, which is you're curing cancer. I mean, in theory, right? You're finding a vaccine for a deadly disease. You're solving a human condition that affects a lot of different people. And there are people with heart disease and kidney disease. I mean, these are basically the big things that affect human beings. And so a lot of people are chasing it after it. So being in a biotech company in any role, I say you've got to love and you've got to be tolerant. And I'd say most people love the roller coaster ride. It's kind of like really fast up and really fast down. I had the CFO who once said to me, and it's a very memorable quote. He says, in a biotech company, you're always on the cusp of wild success or wild failure. And that's actually true. I mean, you're literally on the knife's edge. I think he said like the knife's edge of wild success and wild failure. And you're like, how could that be? But it is true because there've been so many biotech companies that have been sort of counted down and out because their first therapeutic, had some safety issues or didn't look so good or like, take Alzheimer's disease, which everybody's been chasing after. Like talk about a holy grail, right? How many therapeutics have been approved? Very few. And the ones that have been approved have been recently pretty controversial, right? But does that mean that people won't chase it? And does it mean that each of the companies who actually, have a solution or propose a therapeutic for it, their stock's been gyrating like crazy? And with the stock price, I think it's a bit of an index of also how it's like in the company because when the stock's really high, then you can actually raise a lot of money and you can do a lot of deals. And so things go crazy. And then typically the reason your stock is high is because there's some good news for your therapeutic. And so you end up you can, at that point, do a lot of deals, raise a lot of money, and then people can put a lot of effort in behind your business because you have more money. And so you have fuel for it. So things can go wildly crazy. And just as quickly because you have like something runs afoul of your therapeutic, it doesn't work. There's a safety issue. There's a competitor who does it better than you. There's, your drug can't be used in the therapeutic regimen, which is a lot of many of the drugs, like for example, in cancer, have to be combined with other therapeutics, which are the standard of care. If it doesn't combine, and there's a myriad of different reasons why your therapeutic won't work. And if that won't work, then, just as quickly as things go up, things can come down. So being a biotech GC, you have to end up basically, it's like a furious sort of offense, defense all the time. And some people love the adrenaline and some people hate it. And I've known people who've done, who've basically can't get enough of it, and some people who really said this is for dogs and they leave. And so it's an industry that's very, very unique, and you have to love it to stay in it. Yeah.
Yeah. That is great. Thank you for that. When I think about so far, you've made the pivot in-house. Well, before that, you made the pivot to a new practice area. Then you made the pivot to in-house. You became the GC. What was sort of the next pivotal career moment for you?
I think, this is, Joe, you're a GC too. And I think this is one of the things that for anybody who listens to us, you very quickly realize. But, there's grades of seeing or understanding is that you only have one client when you're a GC. If you're an in-house lawyer, you only have one client. And that basically means you don't have diversity of clients. And that's actually that's like a real con. It can be a pro, but it can be a real con, right? And the pro is that you understand the business and you can really concentrate your acumen and you can learn about the business in a very, linear and directed way. That's very helpful. And you become a specialist. And that's why people like you. The native side is, of course, you only have one client, and the client isn't very good. And the company has like a business issue or things don't go well, then your career is basically stuck in that company. And, so you only have one client. It isn't like, in the law firm, it was like, that client lost a lawsuit. That's okay. I've got hopefully several other clients who are doing it. Here, you're in the GC, you're basically, the company is your business. And you could be an excellent lawyer, but if the company doesn't do well, guess what? That's where you are. So, I think that that's when I became a general counsel, I keep emphasizing this is when you go in-house, basically the business is really key to both your success and not success. And as a result of that, it becomes a combination of your acumen as a lawyer, but also a huge aspect of it is luck. And also, did you choose well in terms of your client and the business? And also did the business people, including yourself, who's working at the company, do a good job?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a combination of all those. Sometimes you could do the best job. Also, we all know this. You can do the best job possible, and then sometimes just you don't get the breaks because the industry is different and everything else. And so back to what did I do next? I worked for a series of small biotech companies, and I picked up a lot of skills. And I picked up a lot of skills on basically handling a lot of tumult, and not all of it good. I think I rode the gyration of stock. My first client we took public, and then the stock dropped at the time because it was the kind of the .com boost, bum. I'm sorry, the .com boom and bust of the early 2000s. And biotech is super hot. Biotech was super not hot. And, it's I've ridden that cycle so many times now, right? And as a result of it, I felt as if I wanted to learn the skills of how to deal with crisis. I learned the skill. In biotech, being a biotech GC, I think you learn very well how to handle bad news, safety issues, disclosure issues, industry level issues. And right now, we've got lots of news about the FDA and healthcare in general. You should learn to handle it and roll with the punches. And I think that I'll confess, when I first started as a GC, there were times when I was just frightened. I was like, oh my God, is that really happening? What am I going to do about it? And I just kind of the deer in the headlight moments, and there were many of them. I had to say, in the beginning, it was a lot of deer in the headlight moments, which is, what do I do now? And many of the things that I realized was what you were going to do about it now, many of them weren't legal. Many of the issues were oh my gosh, if disclosing this matter will clearly cause a lot of dislocation of our investors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then you learn about like, okay, well, what are you going to do about it? And so I think you become extremely tolerant of, okay, it's never going to be, it's not as bad as you think. It is not as good as you think. Anything good or bad is not as extreme as you think. And so you have to actually be really clear and level headed. Okay, so what's the first thing I need to do? I spent a lot of time calming myself. And this is like through decades of experience. It's like I still do this thing when I get something that is a very high or a very low.
Yeah.
I go, okay. I say, get a grip, take a deep breath. What's the first thing you have to do? What is the number one important thing that you have to do? And then you kind of triage it because that's the only way you can just sort of calm yourself and get going. And, through repetition, you get better and better at it. That's what happens.
Well, you seem so composed and zen. And what I'm hearing is that came over time.
It came, it like everything in life, it comes over time. Do you remember, Joe, of course, when I remember when I was a first year lawyer and I used to see those letters that senior people would draft. And I'm like, oh my God, how do they actually write in such beautiful English? They sound so authoritative and so good. And I was like, I can't even draft a transmittal letter. And I sound like retarded drafting a transmittal letter. and then just 20, 30 years back, you look back and you're like, oh, I still kind of feel that way sometimes. Like, wow, I'm just kind of not really sure that I've expressed myself that well. But obviously, we get better after practice makes perfect, right? We get better over time.
One of the memories that I have early on in law school was, this notion that you're reading an opinion, and maybe it's by Justice Cardozo.
Yeah.
You're supposed to critique it. What's wrong with this thinking? What's wrong? Are you kidding me? How would I? Who am I to question? But then you go through that learning curve and then you can't not question things.
That's right.
Part of being trained as a lawyer. So now take me to that next transition point.
So I was the general counsel of a series of so my first, maybe I'll just go back and say my first biotech company, what I learned, I think, to do was basically take a company public, enshrine legal operations from scratch. So that's hiring intellectual property, hiring, contracts people and trying to do operations. I was literally jack of all trades. For the longest time, I was like one lawyer. So you get to do everything. You learn to actually think like a business person and make decisions. Because I think one of the other things that we talk about being in-house was that instead of looking for a client to make a decision about something, you actually have to make a decision. The client is looking to you. This is the biggest difference with basically being in-house versus in outside, in a law firm, because the outside law firm asks the client, what do you want to do? And you're in-house, the business people are looking at you as the lawyer. What should we do? They're asking you to do it. And so you're kind of doing it. You're making the decision. So learning how to do that and not being super scared about that.
Yeah.
Learning how to do it, frankly. And then my second job, I learned to do my first and second job, I did a lot of partnering deals, a lot of sort of corporate transactions, licensing, collaborations, and different things like that. And then, so I think my second job, with Halozyme, a lot of what we did was basically partnering, collaborations. We had a specialized technology that was a beautiful technology that worked really, really well with large molecule drugs. And it's actually a technology that's being used by almost all the major big biotech companies now to basically turn an IV infusion for a therapeutic into something that can just be delivered in an injection, a subcutaneous injection. So it's a great technology. So we did a lot of partnering deals. And then my third, and handling collaborations, and my third job in-house was at Seattle Genetics initially, and then they became CGen. And it was a cancer therapeutic company. And we were in the process of, I think, really proving out that antibody drug conjugates, which is a novel sort of platform for delivering for basically a cancer therapeutic. And the idea is to take the specificity of an antibody and then attach to it a small molecule, or that can actually kill, or somehow it can be, of course, it can kill the cancer cell, or it can modulate it in some ways. Sometimes it can, there's ways of trying to affect the cancer cell. And the first initial ones were all like chemotherapeutics, which were intended to just kill the cancer cell. So it's like basically a directed way of hitting just theoretically targeting just the cancer cell and not really the surrounding tissue. And so CGen, I think, was literally one of the pioneers in that field, and it did extremely well. It brought on, several antibody drug conjugates, which have become a very, very important drugs. And so I worked with a great management team that basically took that. When I got to the company, they had launched their first drug, and then they increased the number of labels the drug got. And then in addition, they brought in several new drugs. And from that company, I learned how to, continue to do a lot of deals, continue to basically do a lot of like sort of complex M&A transactions. Like we were very interested in acquiring drugs or acquiring other companies, licensing in drugs and technology. And so we did a lot of that. So we'd obviously, like my second company, we not only licensed out our technology, we actually also licensed in and acquired a lot of technology at my third company. And so that was sort of my last in-house job. And the company in 2003, I'm sorry, not 2003, 2023, got acquired by Pfizer at the very end of the year, like in December. And that was a culmination of basically a lot of work. And Seattle Genetics, CGen, was a company that was really very successful in improving out ADCs. And so I think there were many people who were very interested in the company, had been for many years. And so it was a culmination of sorts and sort of cemented, I think, and of the prowess and the success of CGen doing antibody drug conjugates to attract a prominent company such as Pfizer to be very interested in us.
Right. What did your department look like during your tenure at CGen before they were acquired?
It was, I think when I got to CGen, the entire department was maybe, so like in the combined legal group, we had intellectual property, we had always corporate compliance in biotech and pharma. And probably in your world, Joe, you know, compliance is a huge portion of it. And it resided in the legal group in my company. When I started, maybe I want to say it was like 17 people, including myself. And not all of those were lawyers. I would say probably, I will say like 10 lawyers and people with JDs, even though I think 2 of those people were JDs who worked in compliance. And that inclusive of intellectual property lawyers, maybe 3 or 4 people were intellectual property lawyers, and then a few transactional lawyers. And then we had some paralegals. So maybe it was 15. I don't really know. At the very end, we had, I want to say that we had a legal group that was in the 70s.
And again, over what time frame was this? How many years?
So this was from 2014 to 2023.
Okay. Pretty significant growth. Wow.
Yeah, very much. I mean, CGen, like I think when I started, I was maybe, I was like, it wasn't just a legal group. I think if anything, the legal group was very commensurate with the growth of the rest of the company experience, because at the period of time we were CGen, we started off with 1 medicine, and at the very end we had 4 therapeutics. And so you can imagine like how much infrastructure and personnel and additional people had to basically fund that growth.
Were you growing the legal department through acquisitions, or were all those new hires?
They were all new hires. I cannot remember very many. I know that through some of the acquisitions we got some technical people, but I can't remember legal members who joined our team through the result of deals or acquisitions. So
yeah,
it was mostly new hires.
Were there anything? Well, what are the things that toward the end of your tenure you knew as a GC that you wished you had known back when you had your first GC role?
I think one thing I learned was to be okay with uncertainty. I think that I was never a person who loved uncertainty when I maybe it's just like I always wanted to know, so what's the outcome? How's it going to end? How's it going to end? And what's the end zone? What's the end goal? so I can get there, right? Like, okay, there you go to the right, and that's where you want to be end up. You want to be in Rhode Island, you got to go in that direction, right? I think a lot of what I learned was that you got to be really comfortable not always knowing exactly where it's going. And I think that if I had known that earlier, I think I maybe would have enjoyed the ride a little bit more.
Right.
But I think again, it's hard to rewind and think back. I think that one of the things that I wish that I knew, and I didn't get so much later, is that it's okay not to be the person talking. In fact, I mean, I think a lot of times people think lawyers are outspoken and, they want to be telling people things, here's what to do, here's not what not to do. And I think a lot of times that's not the right answer. I think that the right answer for a lot of lawyers is to first really exquisitely understand the problem and to realize that a lot of times the legal solution is not the answer. I think the answer it starts off with what does the client really need and what does it want to do? And those are organs, what things, what the company should do. Okay, now that's a great segue into talking about looking at the board of directors, right? Because in the end, it's about like, what is the strategic direction of the company? And so the number one rule, I think, of any lawyer, in-house or out, but specifically in-house, because that's our job, is to implement the strategic direction of the company, is to understand what is the strategic direction of the company. And a lot of what we do is to explain the strategic direction is informed a lot by the law. Like, say, for example, the company wants to raise a lot of money. Of course, it matters. What's the funding environment? Can you finance? Are you a public company? Do you have like the wherewithal? Those things. But in the end, the decision of what we do is up to the board of directors, the management of the company, and general counsel or management of the company. But it's to understand that well before you open your mouth and start talking about the law, and be okay with just listening a lot and understanding the business. I mean, I wish I had known that more and felt more comfortable with that. And I mean, those are two things that sort of just come to mind. I'm sure there are others. I could just go on and on.
Your board service, did that predate the acquisition of CJEN, or did that come out?
It did. Okay. It did. And it was also a deliberate pivot. It was also a deliberate pivot because I, as general counsel, we're always in the boardroom. Like, I think that when I talk to most general counsel, they know who's a good board member, who's not a very good board member. They know when there's like a well-functioning board, and they also know when a board is not well-functioning. In fact, a lot of times, people, when boards go to lawyers, it's always because they're like, they're having some sort of issue. And I think that when I was in the boardroom for so often, I was like, you know what? This seems kind of fun. This is where like the sausage, actually, it's not where the sausage is made. This is where the strategic direction is made. And then the sausage gets made like, after the board basically decides what to do. I mean, sometimes maybe I should say the sausage is also made when people do robust deliberations and discussions. And so maybe that's also a sausage, strategy. The strategy sausage is being made in the boardroom as well. And it's like many things that you talk about, which is the role of the board is to set the strategic direction of the company, but it has to be informed by the facts on the ground. And that comes from management. And so a little bit, it's the garbage in, garbage out, right? Because if management doesn't tell the board exactly what's going on, then we have lots of situations like WorldCom, Enron, and things like that, where, you have, now whether it's true or not is a different issue, but you have a lot of board members who swear on a stack of Bibles that they didn't know the accounting, the books were being cooked. They didn't know that we were doing all these different shenanigans, right? And, we've had corporate scandal after corporate scandal where people say, the boards of directors, the directors didn't know X, Y, and Z. And, sometimes that's true and sometimes no. I tend to be a little bit of a medium, which is I do think that it's hard. It's harder than you would think. You think that if you're a director, you understand everything that goes on in the company. But sometimes if you're not told, how do you know? I mean, you're not in the company. You don't get to like go in and inspect what's going on. Now, you of course have power to do that, but
you're told what you're told.
You're told what you're told.
Unless you're really digging in.
Yeah. And then when you're digging in, it's obviously usually because you don't trust the management or there's something real crisis brewing, right? Which is also a different thing. So being a director is like sometimes you have to be really, it's like a microscope, again, use my science. Sometimes you have to focus really down on like the small things. And sometimes you have to step way back and see the big pictures. And you have to be able to see, you have to both focus down and you have to actually also, distance yourself to see the big picture and see where it sits. And so I really wanted to, I mean, going back to the thing, like I think of my life a lot, as I've gotten older about like what skills can I learn, how can I still continue to grow my skills and gain new experiences. And for me, like I wanted to be a board member because I wanted to really be able to do that, basically see the big picture, understand the business, be really part and parcel of actually setting the strategic direction of the company and participating in that. And I think it's super fun. And so it was deliberate. And so I joined all three of my boards actually while I was still sitting chief legal officer for CJ.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
And
It
so
was quite.
how did you make that happen?
So a couple of different ways. One is people will tell you this and it's so true. And it's like, oh my God, it just seems so simple. How could it be? It is so simple in some ways, which is you tell people that you want to be a board member. And so I realized that I actually had lots of friends. I had, by the time I was 30 plus years out of law school and been in the industry for that long, I had lots of people who had grown up to be CEOs and senior and directors and senior members of like companies, and I told them that I was sort of interested in being a board member, and so I started having people tell me, oh, there's this company, there's that company, there's this company, that company. So that was one. The other way I did it was that I networked with. I went to a networking session with basically a group that was very focused on raising and increasing the number of women sitting on boards in biotech, and it was called basically Boardroom Ready, and it was basically sponsored by Women in Bio, which is bio is of course the industry group for like biotech, many biotech companies. It's one of our largest industry groups. And they had a subset which is basically focused on women, and so that group sponsored a program which was had in many multiple years got a core cohort of very qualified women who were qualified already to serve on boards. But the idea was to create a networking system to basically they matched this up with mentors who were ready women sitting directors. They basically gave foundational knowledge to a lot of people about like what board members actually do, including like understanding financial statements and understanding what is the role of an audit committee and what like is the role of like nominated corporate governance committees. Everything from basics to rehearsed, like what do you do in this kind of crisis? How do you interact? Like compensation, which is a huge deal now, of course, is for board members. And so it took place in like basically over a week. And so that networking group was also a real font of like possible opportunities. And I got a great mentor there who helped me introduce me to some people who then helped me introduce to one of my other boards. And then one of them I just got because I knew somebody from like a prior job, and I had met the person before, and he and I had sort of interacted a little bit on different other opportunities. And when his company went public, he was thinking, it'd be nice to have somebody with your kind of experience and the acumen. And so basically he and I talked, and I was like, yeah, I'd love to be a board member. So it was sort of a combination of everything. So networking, telling people about it, and obviously a more formal sort of, industry group kind of networking. So I think all of the above is really important. So.
And how do you think having been a GC, a chief legal officer, has informed how you govern as a board member?
The funniest thing is that people make the remark repeatedly to me is that I don't really act like a lawyer. I think in general, people look to me for legal expertise, and they'll say, Jean, you're the lawyer. What would you do in a situation like this? And it's very focused on legal. For my part, I almost never, sometimes it's essential to lead with it. For my part, most times I think about, again, it's not like really, like we can talk about the tactics and we can talk about like what we do, and legal is usually one of them. And what's permissible and what's not sets the boundaries, right? I get. But a lot of it starts with, most times, things what you want to do is legal. It may not be a good idea. Most time what you do is legal. And it starts with basically, again, what do you want to do? And where is the business going? And what can you do about it? And so I spend a lot of time asking very open-ended questions about where we want to go. Where is this strategic direction of the company? And so I think that if anything, being a lawyer informs me. Again, I guess I'm kind of always repeating myself, which is that it's not about the law. It's really about, where does the business need to go? Where should it go? And then we can come in afterwards and establish, how do we actually pull the levers? What are the tactics? What are the important things? And most times, even if, you can't do this, you can do it in any other way. That's what good lawyers do, right? And so that can happen. And there's lots of in-house and outside counsel who can advise on that very easily. If you can't do a financing this way, you can do it. Can't do an equity deal, you can do a debt deal. But the upshot of it is, do you want to raise money now? Is it super dilutive right now for your stockholders to raise money? When is the right time? Like you're developing your drug. Do you want to wait till later? Well, it's more risky. What if your results aren't very good? Then you actually run out of money. If you basically decide to do it, waiting till later, but then it's less dilutive. But if you do it earlier, it could be really dilutive. And it turns out that if the therapeutic does really, really well, then you've just sold a lot of stock like really cheaply. And you may have like some disgruntled investors like, we should have known. Of course, in hindsight, everything's there, but you understand what I mean. Like it's not per se whether you can do something legally. It's really about like what's the right thing for the business, right? And I spend a lot of time reminding probably other board members that, before we jump straight to like, can it be done? We should talk about like, okay, is that a good idea?
Should it be
and so
done?
only when we
Right.
thrash that out, do I basically go, okay, well then how do we actually do it? So,
Jean, this has been a fascinating conversation. I've learned so much. Thank you for
you're very
sharing
welcome.
all that you've shared. I want to ask you, as you turn your next chapter, what are you looking forward to?
Right now, back to the thing, which is I feel like right now for myself, I want to continue to grow and learn. We're like late-ish in our career. I wouldn't say late. I would say late-ish in our career. And I don't have an aspiration to go back to a law firm. I don't have an aspiration to actually be a general counsel immediately. Maybe that will change, but certainly not right now. And I'm loving actually being a director on boards. And I'm also looking to do other things, other interesting things that are none of those above. Because I think that one of the greatest things and the privilege, I am in a very privileged position of basically choosing what else next I want to do. And I would love to continue to really learn and develop new skills that I just don't have. I know there are a lot of skills that I don't have, and I'd love to do that. Like I'd love to policy is something I really want to do. I don't want to be going to politics. Let's just be perfectly honest about it. But understanding policy, understanding how we can do things that are maybe bigger than just corporations, individual corporations, but doing things like tackling new technology areas. One of the things that I've been spending a lot of time on talking to people about is like, if people found new companies, they're therapeutic areas that I feel really like, very like therapeutic areas like cancer is one of those, and autoimmune disease, which I have, is like those are therapeutic areas that I really want to contribute to in some way. And it doesn't have to be in the law, though. Of course, that's helpful, but I'd love to help, with companies in that area. Now, I don't know what that help really means. I think I've learned a lot as I've just talked about in the industry, and I'd love to continue to do that. But it can be in the form of anything. It could be, make it up. You could helping found a company. It could be helping with putting people together. It could be, obviously being on the boards of those companies, introducing people to that. That's one aspect of it. The other thing, and again, I'm really focusing on is some basically some not-for-profits, right? Which are maybe industry groups or people who are like developing novel areas that are helpful for science and society. And those are things that I might be very interested in doing, just again, in the service of learning rather than just, because what I don't want to do is, given the choices that I have, to repeat like what it is that I've done before.
Right. Wow.
So it's a little vague, I'll tell you.
Well, I can't wait
really
to see where it goes. So thank you so much for being on the show and sharing all of that with our listeners. Really appreciate it.
Sure, Joe. Talk to you soon. Take care.
Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed our time with Jean. I know I did. A few key things I'll take from this episode are her description of the experience of working in a biotech company as a series of wild successes and wild failures, and the fact that she was able to secure seats on multiple public company boards while still sitting in a GC role. That's a testament to the wide range of values she brings to the table, and also to the fact that it's not impossible. Okay, until next time, this is Joe Scholl. For more tips on accelerating your path to becoming a world-class general counsel, visit InsideCounselAcademy.com and connect with me directly on LinkedIn.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Becoming the GC. Whether you're preparing for the GC role or looking to sharpen your skills as a sitting general counsel, we hope this episode offered valuable insights and inspiration. If you enjoyed the conversation, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your colleagues and friends. Explore more resources and join our community at InsideCounselAcademy.com. Please tune in next time for more insights and inspiring stories from successful legal leaders.